Hi everyone. After many months of malfunctioning and sessions being washed out, the Parliament passed a historic bill day before yesterday, the Food Security Bill. Unfortunately, this has triggered a huge furor in the country, the markets have crashed, and today we would have woken up to almost every header in the papers saying that the markets have been food poisoned. This is extremely unfortunate, and it is important to declutter what this bill is about and to put it in the correct vocabulary. This is being touted as profligate government spending, something that the country can't afford. Actually, it should be looked at as an investment in the country's future into India's citizens. For the longest time, the whole idea of a buoyant Indian economy has been based on the idea of the demographic dividend, the fact that India has the largest young population in the world next to China. But we have invested absolutely nothing in this demographic dividend. The food bill is a big step in investing in that. India has almost 50% of its children malnutrition below sub-Saharan Africa. For those of us who are privileged, the meaning of what it is to be malnutritioned doesn't often sink home. It means not only that you go hungry to bed every night, but that you are emotionally, intellectually, and physically stunted for life. So when we say that we want to set aside 1.2 lakh crores, which really amounts to 1.2% of India's GDP, into feeding our people, it is something not that we can't afford, but we can't afford not to do. There's a huge amount of confusion about what this bill will really cost India. The current amount of money that we spend on our PDS system and on giving a certain amount of wheat and rice free to people or at a subsidized rate is 90,000 crore a year. With this new expanded food bill, the cost of this is going to go up by 30,000 crore to about 1.2 lakh crore a year. There's a huge bashing of sentiment that has happened in the market. Foreign investors are fleeing, corporates are upset. Everybody feels that the country cannot afford this extra 30,000 crore in the current climate. All of this really is fear-mongering. You need to understand some subsidies, some comparative figures to put this in perspective. In the last year alone, the government gave a subsidy in tax exemptions of 60,000 crore to the diamond and gold industry. By no means is this an essential feature of our national life. Look at another subsidy. We spend about 5 trillion in tax SOPs, tax exemptions that are given to corporations and to industry. 5 trillion. Is it too much to spend 30,000 crore more in feeding our people? So that's insofar as the cost is concerned. There is also a lot of concern about delivery, and that is a fair concern. But again, the entire furor should be about enforcing more efficient governance and delivery than in questioning whether this bill should be there in the first place. Chhattisgarh and Tamil Nadu are great examples of how within the existing framework, governments have been able to deliver. In Chhattisgarh, they have almost 90% of their citizens that are able to get rice at 2 rupees. In Tamil Nadu, it's also pretty much universalized. And the corruption that everyone fears has been minimized by some very small and banal interventions that every state can do at almost no cost. In Chhattisgarh, for instance, they have taken away fair price shops from private operators and given it to either women or panchayats or cooperatives within particular communities. They have computerized the godowns from where grain is released. They send a SMS to some eminent people in the villages when the grain is released from the godown so that they can check when it is received in the fair price shop and that there is no pilferage. And most of all, and that again is the other contentious aspect of this bill and the debate, is that they have almost universalized it. A huge amount of why the PDS is corrupt and inefficient is because so far it has been a targeted distribution system. I have personally, over the last year, in the summer, traveled with John Rez and Ritika Khera, the architects of this bill in some ways, through Uttar Pradesh and Chhattisgarh. And what one sees on ground is terrifying, because we went from house to house in the most impoverished districts of Sonbhadra and UP, and one family would have got a BPL card, another family would not have got it. And that is because the criteria of deciding who is poor was so complicated. how many sets of clothes they had, whether it was a pakka house, whether they owned a cow, whether they owned a cycle. And these parameters are so difficult to determine that there was no rationale for who had a BPL and who didn't. What was the entitlement that people could ask from the government? There was no clarity on that. When you universalize it, then people know what they can expect, and it is better to have an exclusion criteria rather than trying to find the correct amount of poor, and that's like looking for a needle in a haystack. So by creating exclusion criteria, this bill again has made a huge step. There are a couple of other fears that the bill has raised, which is that so many entitlements will make this country a lazy and unproductive society. That is again such an elitist viewpoint that it almost begs for no answers. Just imagine that as we get higher salaries, does that curb our desire? When you go on ground in many of these places, there is no employment. People are just scratching out a subsistence living. The point is, and again this is something that I have seen from people saying it in their own mouths, that when they get rice, when they get wheat, when that basic platform of being human is taken care of, that is when entrepreneurship kicks in. People start self-help groups, they start cooperatives, they start some form of entrepreneurship. It is absurd to imagine that 80% or 70% of India, that the moment they get a bit of wheat and rice into their bellies, that they will have no other material aspiration. They will not want to send their children to school, they will not want to buy clothes, they will not want to have a motorcycle, they will not want to buy a TV. That assumption is so misplaced that, as I said, it's almost difficult to argue. So what we're really talking about is bringing India onto a basic platform of human dignity. What we're talking about is unleashing the capacity for entrepreneurship. What we're really talking about is creating buying power in the rural economy. And there are two other extremely crucial aspects to this bill. One is that this is not just about delivery of rice and wheat to 70% of India's population. There are two other extremely crucial aspects of this bill. One is that for the first time, it ensures a payment of rupees 1,000 a month to pregnant mothers and lactating mothers for about 6 months into their pregnancy. What this really means is that we are addressing the absolute heart of malnutrition in the country. Many studies are showing that the impacts of malnutrition kick in from 0 to 3 years, and the effects of this can never be mitigated in one's adult life. So the other aspects of this bill is the fact that lactating mothers will be given money to be able to eat well, and that in addition to the midday meal scheme that the government already pays for, that there will be an integrated child development scheme in which 0 to 3 years age of children before they go to school will also be ensured a certain level of nutrition. That's one important fact. The other is that there is a fear that India is not food secure enough to be able to produce the amount of grain that this bill will demand. That is a complete misunderstanding and a misrepresentation of facts again. Every year, India stores over 700 lakh metric tons of cereals in warehouses or out in the open, and it rots, it's eaten by rats, and then sometimes in desperate measures, the government actually exports this out at lower prices than what it bought it at, so that the country makes a loss on exporting these cereals to foreign countries rather than providing it to our poor. Chaudhury has a very interesting statistic where he says if we put out a series of sacks of grain that is lying in warehouses or just lying out in the open, one after the other, it would stretch out for 1 million kilometers, which is pretty much all the way to the moon and back. So ask yourself, what is this panic really about? Can India not afford this bill, or can we afford not to have this bill? Thanks for listening in.